Hello, I'm Don Mooers. Welcome to Montgomery Week in Review. The 2018 session of the Maryland General Assembly completed its work in April. County is now assessing the results. Melanie Wenger, Director of the Montgomery County Office of Intergovernmental Relations, will fill us in on what we saw in Annapolis. The work of the Nature Conservancy includes work to restore more than 30 preserves across Maryland and D.C., across our metropolitan D.C. area. It's taking place under the leadership of our next guest, Deborah Landau. She'll tell us about the ways the Conservancy is working to accomplish its goals. The May issue of the Beacon newspaper includes some very interesting stories about our health, as well as several other stories about issues of importance to all of us. Stuart Rosenthal, publisher and editor of the Beacon, is here to talk about them. Two races for the Board of Education will be the focus of part of the primary ballot in June. And these are for District 3 and the at-large race. Jane DeWinter, who comments regularly for Montgomery Week in Review, is here to explain about who is running and who will get to vote for Board of Education seats coming up. Wonderful to see everybody.
Good to
Melanie,
be here.
it's great to see you. What a ramp up. I mean, let's remember this was the fourth and final year of this particular General Assembly. They're all running out the door to get elected, raise money. We've got a governor who's Republican. Mm-hmm. We've got a Democratic majorities in the House of Delegates and the Senate. So it must have been a real interesting time.
Well, I think the term's been very interesting. I mean, it's been kind of 2 years of kind of getting used to how things are going to be. And, we've experienced this before where under another Republican administration, Bob Ehrlich, where there were kind of gaffes early on that kind of set the trend for the entire term. And that hasn't happened here. So that's a whole nother story. But I think I'd be interested in just telling you that the county did well.
Okay, let's go through it. Because I know people got questions and this is such a short time. Point out like a couple of places where we did well. Let's just then start and then open it up and we can learn more about it.
So I think one of the big stories is Metro funding. I mean, this has been something that's been going on for many, many, many years. The Metro system in the Washington region had become not reliable, not safe, or certainly perceived to be that way. And finally, the three jurisdictions came together, the big three.
And Governor Hogan was one of the first to say we have to do this.
He was. He was also interested in trying to get federal money or federal participation in it. That didn't happen. I think he's still hoping that happens. I think all three places are. We'll see. But Montgomery County, or the Washington region, Prince George's, Montgomery County, Maryland, got a commitment into perpetuity for an additional $167 million a year to fund capital for Metro. This is huge.
Right.
I mean, it should stabilize the system, hopefully, and we're going to have a functioning, great system.
Winners, losers in that Metro race, because I know that so often the Metro funding falls prey to other transportation needs around the state, Baltimore especially, but then in the western part of Maryland, central, eastern shore. How did the governor and the General Assembly work together to get this funding dedicated when so often we hear, well, you guys are, streets are paved with gold, you don't need this money, we need it much more in other parts of the state?
Well, I think that there is a recognition that the Washington region has to work. And it cannot work without that metro system being of high quality. And I think that the Baltimore region understands that. And nothing's for free in Annapolis. So the Maryland Transit Authority, which supports the Baltimore transportation, also did well.
We see MTA on the buses and their own subway.
So there was also a financial package that was part of the deal. And also another thing that kind of came together in all of this was schools, the public school systems all around the state. And so it was really a package of this $167 million for the Washington region, some money for other systems, particularly the Baltimore region, the transportation area, and then intertwined in all of this was a school package.
Okay.
So I wanted to go back to Metro because I think that I don't think I'm alone in also assessing that Metro, whether it's management or governance, whatever, needs to make some changes. And so is there anything from this the session that addressed that, or are they planning to?
But now that the gold is in, we can try to do some ruling?
Right, well,
Well,
I mean,
yeah, actually, there were two other pieces of legislation that I didn't mention that accompanied the big funding package. And one was a change in how Maryland does its board membership. It's going to, was a piece of legislation that I think will professionalize certainly our membership on the board. And then also there was more of an accountability piece of legislation that passed, which was kind of a surprise. In fact, the county didn't really pay a lot of attention, thinking it was going to fall prey to, you know, keep your eye on the ball, keep your eye on that 167 million.
Yeah.
But it also passed.
And what's
So
that? Tell us about that accountability, because I also want to get on to some other topics too. But
I can't tell you all the details about it, but it does have some strengthening things. I think it made some people feel better. For example, you know, exactly what you raised. People went like, "Oh, we're spending all this money," and you know, there were concerns too. Certainly out of Montgomery, like.
we've got about 90 seconds left. What's another success?
Well, I think school construction. I think that we negotiated a package. Baltimore City found itself in severe need. You know, they had a lot of problems that presented themselves again in the city.
Sure.
And so we negotiated for, I think, probably the largest public school construction package out of the subdivisions this year, in exchange for obviously being willing, along with other subdivisions, to help Baltimore City with their problems.
And to that, I mean, we have a large backlog in Montgomery County, but enrollment they're saying is probably just finally going to start to flatten, which, you know, I don't think that this is going to get us completely caught up. I don't think you ever get caught
We've got
up.
about 30
But
seconds
it
left.
is that's going to be some pressure off of.
The more
real
you
question
can bring
was-
home, the better, and we're bringing home a chunk of change, I think, which will be helpful.
Coming from here, looking ahead, all in all, you think everybody seemed to get along well in the sandbox, different jurisdictions?
I think, again, our delegation was exceptionally good this year. And I think there was a recognition that the delegation is to be dealt with out of the Baltimore region. So I think we had a really strong year. I felt really good about the delegation. They're smart, they're committed, they work hard, and they're making friends. So it's good.
Just like you, every time you're on the show, Melanie. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Deborah, welcome. Your first time on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You know, Nature Conservancy, and it's hard not to connect you to the Nature Conservancy with it proudly displayed on your shirt. Maybe we'd start off because it's one of the most famous organizations operating in the United States and around the world. What does the Nature Conservancy do?
Well, it is the largest environmental organization in the world. It historically was a land trust. We would buy land and preserve it.
So I'm rich. I've got 100 acres on the eastern shore or next to wetlands in Long Island. I might say, hey, I want to put this over to Nature Conservancy, and you'll take care of it from there.
Well, it would depend. If it had some sort of ecological significance, then we would either buy it or have you donate it to us, or perhaps we would consider putting a conservation easement on it so that it would never be developed. If it was land that you were donating to us, say that had a house that was in a suburb, then we might turn it around and sell it and use that money towards purchasing more ecologically significant land.
Gotcha. Okay. So you said that's how it was founded. Let's put it to today and your work in the metropolitan Washington region. Tell us about that.
Well, two things. First, we can't just keep buying land. We just can't keep up. So we're working on a much larger scale, more globally, looking at bigger picture items like climate change. But what I do specifically is ecological restoration in the Maryland, D.C. area.
Okay.
So for
What is that?
example,
Yeah.
well, what we're trying to do is bring it back, not the way it used to be, but as close as we can, say 400 years ago when John Smith first arrived on the Eastern Shore.
Okay.
That's kind of the reference point that we're using in trying to get back as close as we can to that.
So get rid of invasive species, trying to get it to what it.
Yep,
what the
get rid of
native species were.
invasives, encourage natives, and one of the ways we do that is by introducing ecological processes. For example, control burns.
Okay.
We've always had fire in Maryland, in North America.
Right.
And we always will have fire, just like rain. But what we've done over the past 100 years or so is we've suppressed fire. When there's a fire, we put it out, and as we should. We don't want our houses burning down.
Right.
But what that's done is it's really altered the natural communities in our areas here in Maryland and across the U.S. So what we're doing is trying to reintroduce fire in a safe way, in an environmentally sensitive way, so that these forests can have the heat pulses they need,
Right.
can open back up.
Can you explain how
And-
that works? What is the benefit of the fire and
Yeah.
lightning?
So let me start by the negatives of not burning. What's happening is we are having all this fuel building up, and that's not natural. So it's shading out many of, like the spring ephemerals, the wildflowers, many of the smaller vegetation can't come up. At the same time, it creates a risk so that when that site does burn, and it always will burn, you have a catastrophic fire where everything burns. Normally in a natural fire, it's a light fire, it's burning fine fuels. They'll go up very quickly, the larger species, the trees will survive.
This is from lightning, for example?
For example, from lightning, exactly. Or the Native Americans used to set fires regularly.
On purpose?
On purpose. It would, it had all sorts of benefits. It would increase.
They understood that back
They
then.
really understood it. It increased deer populations, it reduced tick populations. They knew that back then, and it would increase germinations, a lot of the foods that they needed to eat. So now what happens if you have a fire that's been in it, that ignites in an area that's been suppressed, then it's so hot it kills all the vegetation, including the trees, and that's not safe for communities.
So you're doing this control. How many properties are we talking about in this D.C. metropolitan area as you're going through?
So the Maryland D.C. chapter of Nature Conservancy owns about 30 preserves. We're
Okay.
currently burning on about 10 of them, on the eastern shore as well as in western Maryland.
What's the closest? Are there any lands or any properties in Montgomery County?
Well, the Billy
Nearby?
Goat Trail, many people don't
My
realize.
Billy Goat Trail?
Your Billy Goat
I
Trail
go to the
is
Billy Goat Trail every week.
co-owned. The Nature Conservancy with the Park Service co-owns it.
Okay.
But otherwise, we have preserves, not really anything else in Montgomery County. We
Right.
have Frederick County, Allegheny County, Washington County, Garrett County, and on the shore. Most of the counties on the lower shore, we've got preserves. They're not all
About
easy.
a minute left in the segment here.
Not all easy to visit, but if you go online to nature.org, you can find where some of them have trails and facilities. But for the most part, we're protecting them for the ecological value. Everybody's welcome to come and visit a preserve, but sometimes they're hard to find, and they don't have facilities, so you kind of have to
How
go
do you know
on
not to
your
go
own.
when they're burning?
Well, we have big signs.
Okay, good.
Says smoke ahead.
All
So
right.
if you see one of those, and we bring all sorts of resources. We have fire engines.
I
So
About 20 seconds left. What's the message you want to leave with Montgomery County?
well, by protecting these areas and restoring it, we're improving the health not just of these natural areas, but human health. We're making it safer. We're making the plants that used to be here come back, and I think it really helps to connect people with nature when they have these areas they can visit. Historically, our forests used to be open. You could walk through them. When John Smith first came here, he described park-like communities. So I think they're much more visitable, fewer ticks, once we've restored them to what they used to be.
Well, I hope you'll restore our sense of being in nature by coming back again sometime.
Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. And we're back, Stuart. It's always great to have you.
Thank you, Don.
May edition of the Beacon. Let's get to it. You've got some great health stories.
Very interesting ones. We all know that cancer surgery is fairly common. It's a very important way of keeping people alive longer. And a lot of us also know people who've gone through surgery who had to go back into surgery
Right.
because they didn't get everything, as they say.
Right.
So it's interesting. They've now come up with a way. They're developing it. It's an experimentation. But there are dyes which they can inject ahead of time, put it through IV into the patient, that are fluorescent. And then once they've opened up the patient, the cancer cells absorb the dye. And when they shine infrared light on the patient, the cells light up and they luminesce, and you can see where you need to cut them out. So you know you're going for the tumor, but you don't know where else the tumor cells may have gotten. And this can show you, well, they've spread to the lung or they've spread somewhere else, and you can get them out.
So that's
go
kind of
in
like when
once,
they talk
right.
about like
Yeah.
getting clean margins
Yes,
and things.
exactly.
That's what they,
Exactly. Apparently, about a third of all breast cancer patients have to go back in because the margins aren't clean. So there's several things they're doing to develop that. There's also a device which sort of right there in the operating room can tell you whether there are cancer cells. But that is apparently also being developed. But these dyes are being targeted now to particular cancers, so that the protein that in that cancer absorbs this particular dye and lights up this particular color, and they can find
Is
it.
this NIH doing this? Or
This
is
is
it
various different,
various different-
yeah, a number of, apparently, I don't remember where he's from, but there was a surgeon who came up with the idea. apparently he had lost a patient who he felt very close to and he felt very bad about. And he was with his son in the nursery, sort of spending the evening, with the sun. And he looked up; they had these fluorescent stars on the sky, the floor, the ceiling of the nursery. And he thought, if we could only do that with, and then he came up with the idea, and they sort of began experimenting.
Is it smart?
Is it still
brilliant,
experimental, or is it actually in practice now?
Apparently, there are definitely a lot of studies going on that are where it's being used, and they're finding it very, very helpful.
Deborah, as you'll find, because hopefully you'll watch the show a little bit, is when Stuart is talking about these health stories coming out of the Beacon, almost invariably within 6 months it becomes the norm in practice.
Well,
He's the
that's-
cutting edge. It's
Oh, thanks to us. No doubt.
That would be
What's
wonderful
the
to
next-
know that.
What's the next story?
Well, obesity is another big problem that we're facing,
Sure.
and people want to know, how hard it is to lose weight. So there've been another thing that started out with being just anecdotal. They discovered that a lot of people who had stomach surgery, bariatric surgery, and lost a lot of weight, that their sense of taste changed as they lost weight. They got better sense of taste. So they began doing studies with lab rats, and they discovered, sure enough, when you count the cells in taste buds, that as rats get overfed and become obese, they lose taste cells.
It's interesting.
Yeah, about a fourth fewer taste cells in rats that are fat.
Sounds
than
like
that-
both
than
good
not.
and bad news, because the more taste buds you have, the more you're going to want to be adventuresome with food.
Well, but maybe
And
healthier foods would be
maybe
more-
healthier. Okay,
more
that's
fe-
good.
I
That's
don't
good.
really know how it's going to affect people when it comes right down to it, but
Right.
that's the idea, is that maybe people will get more satisfaction out of
Right.
their food.
I think that.
Yeah.
And when you're if you can be satisfied sooner, then you don't eat as much.
You'd stop, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Exactly.
right.
And they also wanted to know if maybe fat had something to do with, like high-fat foods. Apparently, it doesn't have any impact on it. But what they do think is this: that inflammation in the body is a result of obesity. There's a lot more inflammation. So I don't know how they did this, but they
And that has issues with cancer. That has issues with
all kinds of things,
everything else, right?
So they injected. First of all, they bred a rat that didn't have this particular cell, this
Right.
molecule that
Right.
led to this kind of thing, and they didn't lose taste bud cells.
Okay.
Then they took ones that had lost the cells and they injected this into it, and it came back. So they seem there's some connection with this inflammation and also the taste buds.
Let me turn the subject away from health real quick. We're seeing more and more scam artists
Oh, yes.
seem to be going after our seniors.
Right.
What are some of the things that you're seeing? or
Well, right
finding
now,
out?
tax season has just ended, and people are getting back their refunds. So they're all out there. They're calling on people on their phones and sending emails saying, "We have your refund. We just need to have your bank account number so we can deposit it for you."
No.
That's not how it's done, fellas, but that's what people are thinking. Now, oh, great! I'll get it right. I'll get it sooner. Here it is. And they're just fishing for your ID information. They can steal your ID.
If that happens to someone what can they do? Is there someone they can call with and say somebody
Well,
just
yeah,
called
I
me
mean,
asking
Stuart,
for the number?
Oh, yeah,
Stuart
you
will
call the
provide-
IRS.
The
Yes.
Stuart will
IRS.
provide his cell phone number.
That's right. And his home address.
Right. They have a great number. It's something 1040, whatever it is. But
Okay.
it's a very easy number.
Well,
to
you
remember.
could be assured. I
I
mean,
don't
the
have it.
IRS can't even answer their phone. They're definitely
That's
not calling
true.
people.
That's
Good point.
That's a very good point.
But are they answering when you complain too? Is the problem? I don't know. But the IRS deals with you by mail. You'll get a letter in the mail, and even then you have to be careful because there are people who are like imitating IRS mailings and making it look like it's an IRS.
15 seconds. Where are we traveling?
Oh, we're traveling to Sicily.
Okay.
There's also an article about voluntourism where you go abroad and you do work in
Right.
exchange. But I do want to also put one more last plug in for our Celebration of the Arts. We're still open for competitors in painting and drawing, sculpture, photography, and poetry. 6 more weeks. This competition is open. It's online. Go to mdfedart.com/
Minimum age?
Beacon Celebration. 50 and older. Amateur artists 50 and over.
Is
can
So
there a
enter.
kids,
show?
kids are invited to this. 50.
Yes,
Yeah,
if
those
they're
are
in their
kids.
50s, they're kids. That's right. You and I can say that.
Stuart, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Jane,
Hi.
Board of Education.
Yes.
So a lot of interesting topics here.
Right.
And nothing is more important in Montgomery County than our respect for education. And coming up with the budget is centered at the county council and the executive on the school budget. Talk about Annapolis and school building budgets. But the people who are making decisions about what curriculum and what we're doing to those funds and everything else, that Board of Education, it's a very, very important race.
Right, and I think it's interesting because there's going to be just 2 races on the primary ballot,
Okay.
but there are actually a total of 4 races for Board of Education.
And that's because it's a nonpartisan.
It's
and so if there's
nonpartisan.
2, we'll have 2 for the general election, and we're whittling down to the top 2
Right.
with the contested
Well, right.
elections?
It's a nonpartisan race, and a lot of people don't realize that even if you're running for a district seat that's to represent a certain area, you still, people countywide vote for you. So that the top two advance, so that there's two of the seats that are, in this year's cycle, that there's only two people running. So those two are all going to automatically advance, and then there's two primaries.
And even if you didn't register as a Democrat or Republican, this is the one.
There's
this
the
is the
one thing
race
that an independent can vote for. And the other thing to know is that the ballot, with so many seats open in so many races, Board of Education is the very bottom of the ballot.
So
you
keep
got to go
going,
all
keep
the
going.
way through, all the way through. And people may be surprised because they may have heard a couple of names and then go, well, why didn't even see them on the ballot? Well, that's because if it's with a race with only two people, they're going to go ahead
They won't be on
anyway.
this one.
Right.
All right, so we got District 3 and the at-large. So
Right.
why don't we start District 3?
So District 3 is Pat O'Neill's seat, and
Okay.
she's been on the board for 6 terms, and she's running again.
My neighbor.
Right, and that's the Bethesda Potomac area. And she has 2 challengers, both of whom coming out of either local or county PTA experience.
And so is it strange to see an established incumbent who's been there for 5 terms now to be challenged in this way by 2? Or is this
It's not strange in general because frequently incumbents are challenged. I mean, Pat has not had very strong challenge for quite a while. So maybe.
Are these strong challengers?
I don't really know them. I think that anytime you come out of a PTA background, you've got some people know you, whatever. But I think that Pat is very well known in the county, and I think it's really just a matter of are people tired of her or
And
not.
that at-large race now, there's a lot of
There are 8
people in there,
people
right?
in that race,
Wow.
and I think that's because the current incumbent, Jill Ortman-Faust, was initially going to run again, and then decided to run for county council at large instead. So it's an open seat, and when it's an at-large seat, it means you can be anywhere in the county and run, so that there's 8 people in that race.
What's the issue that you think is the defining issue in this Board of Education race of looking ahead? We have about 2 minutes left this
Yeah, I think that it's probably still achievement gap and how are our kids doing, and are we meeting their needs and the needs of all the individual as individuals or as different populations, different areas of the county.
So those are the platforms really that people that they're going to work to minimize or improve the situation where there's gaps in achievement.
Right. I mean, I think
is that what
that's probably a
their
big
platforms are?
thing. I mean, there are always people who do. I mean, there will be people, or there's people who are really keen on the construction and overcrowding, and that is something that that's what's drawn them into the race. Last election, it was a lot more on accountability. I'm hearing less on that right now. So, I mean, for example, in Pat O'Neill's race, one of the things that the 2 challengers are talking about is because she no longer has her children are out
Right,
and professionals and all that. So they're talking about, well, you really should have kids in the school system now. Well,
That's an interesting
that's
platform.
a big point. Yeah.
45 seconds left. Where do you think this is going?
Well,
Go
so
ahead.
I do think that one thing is interesting. There's 7 adult members and 1 student member of the board. New student member of the board was just elected this week, a woman from Richard Montgomery High School. She'll be a senior next year. And then there's 7 other seats. Well, one of the seats that's not in the election this year, the incumbent is running for delegate.
Okay.
So potentially, if
Now
all
we'll open up.
Right. Well, if all the challengers win and Rebecca wins at delegate, there'll be 5 new people on the
Okay.
board. So
Boy, that's
that's a big
that's a
turnover.
big change.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, let's hope our schools will survive.
Probably.
I
Jane,
bet they
thank you,
will.
and
Yeah.
Stuart, thank you, Deborah. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having
All
us.
of you
Yeah,
guys.
thank you.
I want to thank all of you in the viewing audience as well for joining us for this week's edition of Montgomery Week in Review. I'm Don Mooers, inviting you to join us next week at this very same time.